Hanging Gardens of Babylon. From Wonder Diaries. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, also known as the Hanging Gardens of Semiramis, are considered one of the ancient seven wonders of the world. They were said to have been built by Nebuchadnezzar II, around 600 BC. There is an alternative story, that the gardens were built by the Assyrian Queen Semiramis during her 5-year reign started in 810 BC, which is not supported much by historians. The said Hanging Gardens of Babylon were a set of gardens located in the ancient city of Babylon, Iraq. The so-called images of the gardens is impressive, not only for its beauty, but also for the engineering feat of supplying the massive, raised gardens with soil and water. The lush hanging gardens were extensively documented by Greek historians, such as Strabo and Diodorus Siculus. However, these are not eyewitness accounts, and there is little first-hand evidence of their existence. Some circumstantial evidence gathered at the excavation of the palace at Babylon have accrued, but does not substantiate the apparently fanciful descriptions of ancient writers. Babylon, located about 80 kilometers or 50 miles south of modern Baghdad in Iraq, was an ancient city with a history dating back to the 3rd millennium BC. The greatest period in the city's history was in the 6th century BC during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II, when the city was the capital of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The empire had been founded by Nebuchadnezzar's father Nabopolassar after his victories over the Assyrian Empire. Nebuchadnezzar II would go on to even greater things, including the capture of Jerusalem in 597 BC. The Babylonian king then set about making his capital one of the most splendid cities in the world. The origins of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon go back to Nebuchadnezzar II. Accounts indicate that the garden was built by King Nebuchadnezzar II, who ruled the city for 43 years starting in 605 BC. Nebuchadnezzar II had many monuments and temples built in his capital Babylon. According to legend, he would have built the gardens for his wife, who came from Medes, a mountainous region of western Iran, where the vegetation was denser than in the Babylonian desert. Nebuchadnezzar II is said to have constructed garden in order to win favor with his wife, Amyidis, who had the passion for mountain surroundings. It is also unclear why and when these gardens were destroyed. There is very little information available, and this is one of the reasons why the existence is in doubt. According to accounts, the gardens were built to cheer up Nebuchadnezzar's homesick wife. Amyidis, daughter of the king of the Medes, was married to Nebuchadnezzar II, to create an alliance between the two nations. The land she came from, though, was green, rugged and mountainous, and she found the flat, sun-baked terrain of Mesopotamia depressing. The king decided to relieve her depression by recreating her homeland through the building of an artificial mountain with rooftop gardens. The hanging gardens probably did not really hang in the sense of being suspended from cables or ropes, but were formed on levels of terrace or balcony. Construction of the garden wasn't only complicated by getting the water up to the top, but also by having to avoid having the liquid ruining the foundations once it was released. Since stone was difficult to get on the Mesopotamian plain, most of the architecture in Babel utilized brick. The bricks were composed of clay, mixed with chopped straws and baked in the sun. These were then joined with bitumen, a slimy substance, which acted as a mortar. Unfortunately, because of the materials they were made of, the bricks quickly dissolved when soaked with water. For most buildings in Babel this wasn't a problem because rain was so rare. However, the gardens were continually exposed to irrigation, and the foundation had to be protected. The gardens consisted of vaulted terraces raised one above another, and resting upon cube-shaped pillars. These were hollow and filled with earth, to allow trees of the largest size to be planted. The pillars, the vaults, and terraces were constructed of baked brick and asphalt. The platforms on which the garden stood consisted of huge slabs of stone. Upon all these was laid earth of a convenient depth, sufficient for the growth of the greatest trees. How big were the gardens? They were about 400 feet wide by 400 feet long and more than 80 feet high. Other accounts indicate the garden's height was equal to the outer city walls, which were 320 feet high. Babylon rarely received rain, and for the gardens to survive, it would have had to been irrigated by using water from the nearby Euphrates River. That meant lifting the water far into the air, so it could flow down through the terraces, watering the plants at each level. This was an immense task given the lack of modern engines and pressure pumps at that time. One of the solutions the designers of the gardens might have used to move the water, however, was a chain pump. A chain pump is two large wheels, one above the other, connected by a chain. On the chain are hung buckets. Below the bottom wheel is a pool with the water source. As the wheel is turned, the buckets dip into the pool and pick up water. The chain then lifts them to the upper wheel, where the buckets are tipped and dumped into an upper pool. The chain then carries the empty buckets back down to be refilled. The pool at the top of the gardens could then be released by gates into channels which acted as artificial streams to water the gardens. The pump wheel below was attached to a shaft and a handle. By turning the handle, slaves provided the power to run the contraption. An alternate method of getting the water to the top of the gardens might have been a screw pump. As the screw is turned, water is caught between the blades of the screw and forced upwards. When it reaches the top, it falls into the upper pool. Turning the screw can be done by a hand crank. Screw pumps are very efficient ways of moving water, and a number of modern engineers have speculated that they were used in the Hanging Gardens. Stone tablets from Nebuchadnezzar's reign give detailed descriptions of the city of Babylonia, its walls, and the palace, but do not refer to the Hanging Gardens. Today, some historians make the case that the Hanging Gardens of Babylon never actually existed. While it is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, its actual existence is quite contested, with 3 theories prevailing. 1. The gardens were purely mythical and idealized, in the minds of Greek writers and travelers. 2. They did exist, but were raised in the 1st century BC, and 3. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon actually refers to a garden built in Nineveh by the Assyrian king Sennacherib. The warriors in the army of Alexander the Great were amazed at the immense prosperity of the thriving city of Babylon, and tended to exaggerate their experiences greatly. When the soldiers returned to their stark homeland, they had incredible stories to relate about the remarkable gardens, palm trees, and imposing buildings of rich and fertile Mesopotamia. This was After all, the land of Nebuchadnezzar's fabulous palace, the Great Ishtar Gate, the legendary Tower of Babel, and other pyramid-like ziggurats. When all of these extraordinary architectural elements were combined together in the imagination of the poets, scholars, and historians of ancient Greece, the result was probably another, although fictional, world wonder. Others point to Assyrian tablets showing raised hanging gardens from the city of Nineveh, raising the possibility that the Babylonian gardens may be exaggerated, fanciful versions of what existed in another major Mesopotamian city. Through the ages, the location of the Hanging Gardens may have been confused with gardens that existed at Nineveh, since tablets from there clearly show gardens. But, did they actually exist? It is also a possibility they were mixed up with another set of gardens built by King Sennacherib in the city of Nineveh around 700 BC. Researchers think that earlier sources were translated incorrectly, putting the gardens about 350 miles south of their actual location at Nineveh. King Sennacherib left a number of records describing a luxurious set of gardens he had built there in conjunction with an extensive irrigation system. In contrast, Nebuchadnezzar II made no mention of gardens in his list of accomplishments at Babylon. It's also argued that the name Babylon, which means Gate of the Gods, was a title that could be applied to several Mesopotamian cities. Sennacherib apparently renamed his city gates after gods, suggesting that he wished Nineveh to be considered a Babylon too, creating confusion. If we still ask ourselves this question today, it is because there are big doubts about their existence. The first reason why it is possible that they never existed is that the archaeological investigations undertaken have nothing reported, while other buildings of Babylon, such as the ramparts or the Great Palace, have been perfectly. The authors and historians are doubtful because they lived in ancient times, when rare writings were made on the basis of oral description that could easily be diverted. Moreover, each civilization wants to put forward its power. It is normal that the descriptions are always exaggerated. There are no archaeological traces. The chief historian of that time, who did not speak of the gardens, made ancient Greek authors doubtful. Did the gardens of Babylon really exist? First of all, archaeological research is not finished in Babylon. While much of the terrain has been identified, there are still an increasingly restricted areas in which the remains of the Hanging Gardens may be hidden. Then the city of Babylon was not famous only for its hanging gardens, but especially for its ramparts. At that time, the visitors of the city were especially surprised by the ramparts. It is not so surprising that gardens are not mentioned so often in the documents of the time. Nonetheless, the authors, historians, and researchers provided us with a baseline of what these gardens may have looked like and where they may have been located. Gardens such as these would have required a great deal of resources to build and maintain, and so it is likely that they were located in or near the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II, if they existed at all. Extensive excavations of the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II have revealed gates, vaulted rooms, double walls, tablets, large drains, and a possible reservoir. Nothing has been produced, though, either in the archaeological record or the written records, that corroborates the Greek description of the Gardens of Babylon. Since the written records consist of an exhaustive list of Nebuchadnezzar's achievements while king, if he built the gardens, they would have surely been listed, but they are not. What do we make of this lack of evidence? Did Greek authors just become victim to hearsay without ever even seeing the gardens, having never existed at all? Or did they just exist, perhaps at a different time and place? The fact that the gardens are discussed in a wide variety of Greek sources, spanning hundreds of years, and the fact that gardens like the fabled one at Babylon were quite common and not out of the question, it is difficult to outright deny the existence of the gardens altogether. Aside from the silence of archaeology, significantly, no Babylonian sources mention the gardens, either their construction or existence, even in a ruined state. This is perhaps the most damning evidence against the gardens having been at Babylon, because the surviving Babylonian records include comprehensive descriptions of Nebuchadnezzar's achievements and construction projects, right down to the street names of Babylon, but not gardens. If they did exist, what happened to the gardens? There is a report that they were destroyed by an earthquake in the 2nd century BC. If so, the jumbled remains, mostly made of mud brick, probably slowly eroded away with the infrequent rains. Whatever the fate of the gardens were, we can only wonder if Queen Amytis was happy with her fantastic present, or if she continued to pine for the green mountains of her distant homeland. Thanks for watching, friends, and see you in the next video.